Rain fell slowly over the giant city of Nova Prime. Cold drops hit metal roads and tall buildings. Bright neon lights reflected across the wet streets and made red and blue colors dance in the water below. Flying cars moved high above between huge towers. And people walked fast with their heads down because nobody wanted to stay outside at night. For most people, it looked like another normal evening in the city. But tonight felt different. Large security drones moved through the dark sky and scanned every street with bright red lights. Warning alarms echoed between buildings, while giant screens on walls showed emergency messages again and again. "Stay inside your homes immediately," the cold machine voice said. Security operation in progress. People became nervous after hearing the message. Shop owners quickly closed their doors. Families rushed into buildings, and the streets slowly became empty. Far below the rich areas and bright towers of the city, near the old industrial district, a man walked alone under the rain. His name was Daniel. Daniel was 32 years old and worked long hours fixing damaged machines and broken systems for small companies around the city. His dark jacket was old and wet from the rain, and his face looked tired after another long day of work. He walked quietly with his hands inside his pockets and looked down at the road. He wanted nothing except food, sleep, and a warm room. As Daniel walked past an old market street, he looked up at one of the giant screens above him. The screen suddenly changed and a red warning symbol appeared. "Dangerous escaped subject detected," the message said. "Citizens must report anything unusual immediately." Daniel frowned slightly. He had seen strange warning messages before. The city government always searched for someone or something. Sometimes criminals, sometimes smugglers, sometimes things nobody explained. He shook his head and kept walking. "It is not my problem," he quietly said to himself. A few minutes later, he reached a dark road behind old storage buildings. This place was always quiet, and almost nobody came here at night. The sound of rain hitting metal walls filled the empty space around him. Then Daniel stopped walking. He heard something, very soft, very weak. He turned slowly and looked around. Nothing. Only darkness and old containers stood near the walls. Daniel stared for a few seconds before shaking his head. Maybe he was only tired. He started walking again. Then he heard it once more, a small sound. Like someone crying. Daniel froze. This time he knew he heard it clearly. He looked toward a narrow alley between two large metal containers. The sound came from there. For a moment, Daniel did not move. The city was dangerous at night, and smart people stayed away from trouble. But the sound came again, small, weak, scared. Daniel let out a long breath and slowly walked toward the alley. Rainwater dripped from pipes above him as he moved deeper into the shadows. The alley was dark and narrow. Old trash boxes and broken machine parts covered the ground. Daniel looked around carefully. Then he saw movement behind a large container. He stepped closer, and suddenly his eyes widened. A small child sat there. She looked around 7 years old. Her body shook from the cold, and her clothes looked damaged and dirty. Small cuts covered her arms and face. But Daniel quickly noticed something was wrong, very wrong. Her skin was pale blue. Soft glowing lines moved slowly across her small hands. And her eyes glowed with a quiet blue light in the darkness. Daniel stared at her without moving. The little girl looked up at him with fear in her eyes. For a few seconds nobody spoke. The child moved backward and pressed herself against the wall. She looked terrified. Daniel slowly raised his hands. "It's okay," he said softly. "I won't hurt you." The little girl said nothing. She only stared at him with shaking eyes. Daniel suddenly remembered the warning screen from before. Dangerous escaped subject. His heartbeat became faster. "No," he whispered. "No way." Then bright red light suddenly covered the alley walls. Daniel quickly turned around. Several shadows appeared at the entrance. Heavy footsteps moved through the rain. Dark armored figures walked into the street while drones hovered above them. One of them raised a weapon and looked directly at Daniel. Then a cold voice spoke. "Step away from the child immediately," it said. Rain continued falling over the silent streets. Cold water ran across the metal ground and reflected the red lights coming from the drones above. Daniel stood frozen in front of the small alien child while dark armored figures slowly walked into the alley. The child moved closer behind him without making a sound. Her small fingers grabbed the back of his jacket tightly. Daniel could feel her shaking. The armed men stopped a few steps away. Black armor covered their bodies from head to toe. Bright red lights moved across their helmets, and strange weapons rested in their hands above them. 2 drones floated silently in the air and aimed their scanning lights at Daniel and the child. Nobody moved, nobody spoke, only the sound of rain filled the air. Then one of the armored men stepped forward. He looked taller than the others. His helmet had silver marks on it. "Step away from the child immediately," he repeated. Daniel looked at the child for a moment. She was trying to hide behind him. Her glowing eyes were full of fear. He looked back at the men. "What did she do?" Daniel asked. The man did not answer. "That information is restricted," he said. "Hand her over now." Daniel frowned. He looked at the child again. She looked injured, scared, cold. Nothing about her looked dangerous. He had seen dangerous people before. He had seen criminals and violent men in the lower city streets. This was not what danger looked like. This looked like a frightened little girl. Daniel slowly stood straighter. "No," he said. For a second, everything became completely silent. Even the men seemed surprised. The drones above stopped moving. The rain continued falling. Then another soldier laughed softly. "Did he say no?" the man said. "I think he did." The leader took another step forward. "You do not understand the situation," he said coldly. "Move aside." Daniel crossed his arms. "No." The leader stared at him silently. Then he slowly removed his helmet. Daniel expected an angry face, but instead he saw something strange. The man looked tired. Long scars covered one side of his face. His eyes looked cold and empty. He stared directly at Daniel. "You have 30 seconds, he said. Daniel felt the child hold his jacket tighter. He looked down slightly. The little girl was staring at the soldiers. But suddenly Daniel noticed something strange. She was not looking scared anymore. She was looking at them like she knew them, like she remembered them. Then he saw tears slowly forming in her glowing eyes. Very quietly she whispered one word. Again, Daniel looked down at her. Again, the word felt strange. The word felt wrong. Before he could think more, the leader spoke again. 10 seconds left. Daniel's eyes moved between the soldiers and the child. His mind raced quickly. Something did not feel right. If these people were trying to save her, why was she so afraid? Why was she hiding? Why did she look like she had already seen them before? Daniel slowly bent down and looked at her. "Do you know them?" he asked softly. The little girl looked into his eyes. Then she slowly nodded. Daniel waited. A few seconds passed. Then she whispered again. "They hurt me." Daniel froze. The world around him suddenly felt quiet. Rain still fell. Lights still flashed. But for one moment Daniel heard only those words. "They hurt me." He slowly turned his head back toward the soldiers. The leader's expression did not change, not even a little. Daniel stood up again. His jaw tightened. "No," he said again. This time his voice was stronger. "No, I am not giving her to you." The soldiers immediately raised their weapons. The drones above moved lower. Red lights locked onto Daniel's body. The leader stared at him for several seconds. Then he sighed. "You humans always make things difficult," he said quietly. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" The leader looked directly at him. Then a small smile appeared on his face, a cold smile. "You have no idea what you just did," he said. Suddenly, every light in the alley went dark. Darkness swallowed the alley in an instant. The red lights disappeared, the drone sounds vanished. Even the giant neon signs above the street suddenly turned off. For one strange second, the entire world became silent. Daniel's heart started beating faster. "What just happened?" he whispered. Then a loud metal sound exploded behind him. Boom. Bright sparks suddenly flew across the alley walls. Daniel quickly turned around. One of the drones had crashed into a metal container, and smoke poured from its body. The soldiers immediately stepped back. "What is happening?" one of them shouted. Another drone began shaking in the air. Its red lights flashed wildly, left, right, up, down. Then it slammed into a wall. Crash. Daniel stared in confusion. The little alien child looked just as surprised as he did. Blue light slowly moved across her skin. Very small lines of light traveled across her hands like tiny rivers. The soldiers looked at her. Then they looked at each other for the first time. Daniel saw fear in their eyes. "The subject is active," one soldier shouted. "Move now." The leader's face suddenly changed. "Take the child immediately," he ordered. Daniel did not wait. His body moved before his mind could think. He grabbed the little girl's hand and ran. Cold rain hit his face as he pulled her out of the alley. Behind them, angry voices echoed loudly. "Stop them!" Footsteps exploded across the wet street. Daniel ran as fast as he could. The child ran beside him with small, quick steps. Daniel turned around once. Big mistake. 3 soldiers were already running after them. More drones appeared in the sky above. Red scanning lights moved over buildings and roads. Daniel turned back quickly. "This way," he shouted. They ran through narrow streets between old buildings. Most windows were dark because people stayed inside during the emergency warning. Only a few lights still glowed behind dirty glass. Daniel's breathing became heavy. His legs started hurting. But he kept running. He had no plan, no safe place, nothing. He only knew one thing. He could not stop. Suddenly a loud voice came from the sky. "Escaped subject detected. Citizens remain inside your homes." Daniel looked up. Huge screens on buildings suddenly showed the little girl's face. Her glowing blue eyes stared across the city. Under her picture appeared large red words. "Extremely dangerous." Daniel almost stopped running. "Dangerous." He looked down at the little girl beside him. She looked tired and scared. Small cuts still covered her face. She looked nothing like a monster. Then the child suddenly pulled his hand. Daniel looked at her. She pointed ahead. A small side street appeared between 2 broken buildings. Daniel nodded quickly. They turned into it. A few seconds later, armed soldiers ran past the main road without seeing them. Daniel pressed himself against the wall and pulled the child close. Both stayed completely still. Heavy footsteps passed nearby, then silence returned. Daniel slowly let out a breath. "That was close," he whispered. The little girl looked down quietly. Rainwater dripped from her hair. Daniel noticed her body was still shaking. He removed his old jacket and carefully placed it around her shoulders. For a moment she simply stared at him, like nobody had ever done that before. Then very slowly she held the jacket tightly. Daniel sat beside the wall and looked at her. "What is your name?" he asked softly. The child looked at him silently. Several seconds passed. Then very quietly she spoke. "Myra." Daniel smiled slightly. "Mira," he repeated. "It is a nice name." The little girl looked down again. Daniel looked at the dark street ahead. His mind was full of questions. Who was she? Why were those people hunting her? What did they do to her? Then Daniel noticed something strange. Mira was staring at the old broken streetlights nearby. Daniel followed her eyes. The lights suddenly flickered, once, twice. Then all of them turned on together. Daniel slowly looked at Mira. She looked surprised. Then the lights exploded. Boom, boom. Glass pieces rained onto the street. Daniel jumped back in shock. Mira's eyes became wide. "I didn't do it," she whispered quickly. But before Daniel could answer, A red light suddenly moved across the wall beside them. Both froze, slowly, very slowly. Daniel turned his head. At the end of the street stood the leader, watching them, smiling, and behind him stood 10 more soldiers. Cold rain still fell from the dark sky, but Daniel no longer looked up. His eyes stayed locked on the soldiers standing at the end of the street. The leader stood there silently with a small smile on his face. Behind him, armed men slowly spread across the road. There was nowhere to run. Daniel looked left. A metal wall. He looked right. Broken pipes and old storage boxes, no way out. Mira moved closer and held his hand tightly. Daniel could feel her small fingers shaking. The leader took one slow step forward. "You ran longer than I expected," he said. Daniel stared back at him. "What do you want from her?" he asked. The man smiled again. "That question does not matter anymore." The soldiers raised their weapons. Daniel's heart started beating faster. He looked around one more time. Think. Suddenly Mira pulled his hand. Daniel looked down. The little girl pointed toward the ground. Daniel frowned. On the side of the street, hidden behind old trash containers, was a round metal cover, a maintenance hatch. Daniel quickly understood, without saying anything. He grabbed the metal handle and pulled. At first nothing happened. Then with a loud sound the cover moved. Below them was darkness. Cold air rose from inside. The soldiers suddenly realized what was happening. "Stop them!" someone shouted. Daniel did not wait. He picked Mira up and jumped. They fell down a steep metal tunnel. Darkness surrounded them. Daniel felt cold pipes hit his shoulders as they slid lower and lower. Then suddenly, thud, they crashed onto a pile of old cables and broken machine parts. Daniel groaned and slowly sat up. Everything around them was dark, very dark. Only weak blue light from Myra's eyes softly lit the place. Daniel looked around carefully. Huge pipes stretched through long underground tunnels. Old machines sat covered in dust. Water dripped slowly from above. "What is this place?" Daniel whispered. Mira looked around silently, then far away. A strange sound echoed through the darkness. Metal hitting metal. Daniel froze. Someone else was here. He slowly stood up and pulled Mira closer. The sound came again. Clang, clang, clang. Daniel moved carefully through the tunnel. Small lights flickered weakly on old walls. The deeper they walked, the stranger the place became. Old machines sat everywhere. Broken robot arms, damaged screens, piles of metal parts. It looked like someone had been living here for a long time. Then suddenly, a voice came from the darkness. "You should not move another step." Daniel instantly stopped. A bright white light turned on and hit his face. He raised his arm over his eyes. "Who are you?" the voice asked. Daniel slowly lowered his hand. An old man stood in front of them. His gray hair looked messy and long. His clothes were dirty with oil marks. One of his eyes was mechanical and glowed yellow. He held a strange tool in his hand like a weapon. Daniel looked confused. "We are not here to hurt anyone," Daniel said. The old man stared at them. Then his mechanical eye moved toward Mira. For a moment his face became completely still. His expression changed. "No," he whispered. He stepped closer slowly. "No, this is impossible." Daniel immediately moved in front of Mira. "Stay back," he said, but the old man ignored him. He looked at Mira with wide eyes. Then he whispered softly, "They are still making them." Daniel frowned. "What are you talking about?" The old man looked at him. His face suddenly looked serious. "Come inside," he said quietly. Daniel did not move. The old man sighed. "If hunters are after you, standing here is a good way to die." Daniel looked at Mira, then back at the dark tunnel behind them. He had no choices left. Slowly he followed the old man. A few minutes later, they entered a hidden room filled with machines and screens. Daniel's eyes widened. Dozens of images covered the walls. Pictures of strange alien children, research files, experiments. And on one large screen, Daniel suddenly froze. It was Mira. Her picture covered the entire screen. Under it were two words, Subject Zero. Daniel stood frozen in front of the screen. The words Subject Zero stared back at him. For a few seconds, he forgot to breathe. Beside him, Mira looked up at the screen silently. She did not understand the words. But she understood one thing. It was her face. Slowly she moved behind Daniel and held his arm. The old man looked at both of them with a serious expression. The room suddenly felt smaller. The sound of old machines quietly hummed around them. Daniel finally turned toward the old man. "What is this?" he asked. His voice sounded harder now. "What is Subject Zero?" The old man stayed quiet for a moment. Then he walked toward a dusty table and pressed a button. The large screen changed. New files appeared. Pictures, reports. Images of laboratories, long metal rooms, small cages. Daniel felt cold inside. Then he saw children, alien children. Some looked different from Mira, different skin colors, different eyes, different faces, but they all had one thing in common: fear. Every face looked scared. Daniel slowly looked at the old man. "What is this place?" he whispered. The old man let out a tired breath. "My name is Victor," he said. "Years ago I worked for them." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "The hunters." Victor slowly nodded. Daniel's face became serious. "You worked with them." Victor looked down for a moment. Then he nodded again. "I built systems for their research stations," he said quietly. "I believed their lies." Daniel said nothing. Victor pressed another button. New images appeared. Daniel's eyes widened. Huge rooms filled with machines, children inside glass chambers. Bright lights connected to their bodies. Some were crying. Some looked asleep. Some did not move at all. Mira slowly lowered her head. Daniel felt anger rise inside him. "What did they do to them?" he asked. Victor looked at Mira. "They searched for something," he said. "They wanted power." Daniel frowned. "What kind of power?" Victor stayed silent for several seconds. Then he looked directly into Daniel's eyes. "Children like Mira are different," he said. "The energy inside them can connect with machines, systems, even entire cities." Daniel remembered the drones crashing, the streetlights exploding. Slowly his eyes moved toward Mira. She looked scared again. Victor continued speaking. "They wanted control," he said. "They wanted living weapons." Daniel clenched his fists. "No," he said quietly. Mira immediately looked up at him. Daniel looked at Victor. "No child is a weapon." Victor stared at him silently. Then something strange happened. Mira suddenly stepped closer to the screen. Her glowing eyes stared at one picture. Daniel looked carefully. The image showed a room with several children standing together. Mira slowly raised her hand and touched the screen. Then she pointed at one small figure. A little boy with silver eyes. Her lips moved softly. "Brother." Daniel looked at her. "What?" Mira continued staring at the picture. Tears slowly appeared in her eyes. "Brother," she whispered again. Daniel's heart suddenly felt heavy. Victor's face changed immediately. "No," he whispered. Daniel looked at him. "What is it?" Victor walked quickly toward the screen. His mechanical eye scanned the image. Then his expression became dark. "This is bad," he said. "Very bad." Daniel frowned. "What are you talking about?" Victor slowly turned around. "If she remembers him," he said quietly. Then suddenly every screen in the room turned red. "Warning! Warning! Warning!" A loud alarm echoed through the underground room. Daniel jumped in surprise. Victor's face lost all color. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." Daniel looked at him. "What happened?" Victor slowly looked toward the ceiling. His face filled with fear. Then he said 4 words that made Daniel's blood turn cold. "They found this place," he said. Red warning lights flashed across the underground room. "Warning! Warning!" The loud alarm echoed through every tunnel and every pipe beneath the city. Daniel quickly looked toward Victor. Victor ran toward a group of old screens and pressed buttons as fast as he could. "No," he said nervously. "No. This should not happen." Daniel moved beside him. "How did they find us?" Victor stared at the screen. "They followed something," he said. "They should not know this place exists." Then Victor suddenly stopped talking. His mechanical eye looked slowly toward Mira. Daniel looked at her too. Mira stood silently in the middle of the room. Her glowing eyes stared at the floor. Then Daniel remembered something. The drones crashing, the lights exploding, the strange things happening around her. Victor slowly turned around. "They tracked her energy signal," he whispered. The room became silent. Mira slowly looked up. Her eyes widened. Did something bad?" she asked softly. Daniel immediately walked toward her. "No," he said. "You did nothing wrong." But Mira lowered her head. Small tears slowly rolled down her face. "They always said bad things happened because of me," she whispered. Daniel's expression became serious. He knelt beside her. He looked directly into her eyes. "Listen to me," he said quietly. "You hear me?" Mira slowly looked at him. Daniel gave a small smile. "You are not the problem." For a moment Mira simply stared at him. Like nobody had ever said words like that before. Then boom, whole room shook violently. Metal pieces fell from the ceiling. Victor quickly looked toward the tunnel entrance. "They are here," he shouted. Another explosion echoed through the underground tunnels. Dust filled the air. Daniel stood up immediately. "What do we do?" Victor moved toward a table and opened an old metal box. Inside were small devices and strange tools. He grabbed one and handed it to Daniel. Daniel frowned. "What is this?" "An energy pulse device," Victor said quickly. "It will stop machines for a few seconds." Daniel looked at the small object in his hand. "A few seconds?" Victor nodded. "That is all you get." Another loud explosion shook the room. Then voices echoed from far away. "They are inside. Search every tunnel." Mira grabbed Daniel's hand tightly. Her small body started shaking again. Daniel looked at her. He could see fear in her eyes, big fear. The same fear he saw when they first met. Then something changed. Very slowly, Mira looked toward the tunnel entrance. The fear in her eyes slowly disappeared. Daniel frowned. "Mira?" She did not answer. She only kept looking toward the darkness ahead. The voices became closer, footsteps, metal sounds. Weapons moving. Victor looked nervous. Daniel stepped in front of Mira. "It is okay," he said. "We leave together." But Mira slowly let go of his hand. Daniel looked at her in surprise. She took one small step forward. Then another. Daniel blinked. "Mira?" The little girl turned and looked at him. Her eyes still glowed blue, but now something looked different. She was not shaking anymore. "I don't want them to hurt anyone again," she said softly. Daniel felt cold inside. The room suddenly became quiet. Even Victor stared at her. Then shadows appeared inside the tunnel. Soldiers entered the underground room slowly. Weapons pointed forward. Behind them walked the leader. His cold eyes immediately found Mira. For a moment he smiled. "There you are," he said. Nobody moved. Then Mira stepped forward. Daniel's eyes widened. "Mira, wait." But she kept walking. Small blue lights slowly appeared around her body. Tiny pieces of metal on the floor began moving, screws, tools, broken machine parts. Everything started shaking. The soldiers stopped smiling. One of them stepped backward, then another, for the first time. Daniel saw fear on every face. And Mira looked directly at them and said, "No more." The underground room became completely silent. Mira stood in the middle of the room while blue light slowly moved around her body. Tiny metal pieces floated around her like small stars. Screws, broken wires, old machine parts. Everything around her trembled softly in the air. The soldiers no longer looked confident. Their weapons were still raised. But their eyes had changed. Now they looked afraid. The leader stared at Mira without moving. Then slowly the smile disappeared from his face. "Mira," he said calmly. "You do not understand what you are doing." Mira said nothing. Her glowing eyes stayed locked on him. The leader took one step forward. "You were created for a purpose," he continued. "You belong with us." Mira's small hand slowly closed into fists. Daniel looked at her. He could see anger inside her eyes. But he could also see pain, years of fear, years of sadness. Years of being treated like something instead of someone. Daniel suddenly remembered her words. "They hurt me." Then he remembered something else. Every time she was scared, strange things happened. Machines broke, lights exploded, energy moved around her. Is she completely lost control now? Daniel looked around the room. Old machines surrounded them, energy pipes covered the walls. This whole place could become a disaster. He quickly walked toward Mira. "Mira," he said carefully. She did not look at him. Blue light around her became brighter. The floating metal pieces started moving faster. Daniel stepped closer. "Mira, look at me." Still nothing. Behind them, Victor looked terrified. "Daniel," he whispered. "Stop her now." The soldiers slowly stepped backward. Even they looked nervous now. The leader's calm face was beginning to crack. "Mira," he said loudly. "Return immediately." Suddenly all lights inside the room exploded. Boom! Darkness swallowed the room for 1 second. Then blue light returned. Only blue light. It came from Mira. The air itself felt different now. Like invisible waves moved around the room. Daniel moved forward again. "Mira," he said softly. This time she looked at him. Her glowing eyes stared directly into his. Daniel slowly knelt in front of her, around them. Metal pieces still floated in the air. Soldiers stood frozen. Nobody moved. Daniel looked at her with a calm expression. "You are scared," he said. Mira's eyes widened slightly. "You are angry too." Small tears slowly formed in her eyes. Daniel continued. "But you are not alone now." The floating metal suddenly slowed down. Daniel carefully held her small hand. "You don't need to fight everyone by yourself." For a few seconds, Mira simply stared at him. Then tears rolled down her face. Very quietly she spoke. "I am scared." Daniel smiled softly. "I know." The blue light around her slowly became weaker. The floating metal pieces dropped back onto the floor. Clang, clang, clang. The soldiers looked shocked. Victor stared with wide eyes. The leader suddenly shouted, "Take her now." Everything moved at once. Soldiers raised their weapons. Daniel instantly stood in front of Mira. "No," he shouted. The energy pulse device Victor gave him was still inside his pocket. Without thinking, Daniel pulled it out and pressed the button. A powerful wave exploded through the room. Whoom! The soldiers' weapons instantly died. Their lights shut down. Their helmets turned black. Even the drones outside crashed to the ground. Everyone froze. Daniel looked around in shock. Victor stared at him with wide eyes. "Daniel," he whispered. Then he slowly smiled. "You crazy human." The leader looked at his dead weapon with anger. His face twisted with rage. Daniel looked directly at him, then stepped closer. Rainwater still dripped from broken pipes above. The room was quiet again. Daniel stood beside Mira and looked at every soldier. One human against all of them, and for the first time. The hunters took a step backward.